What does death mean in fiction nowadays? On a basic level, death in fiction means that a character who was once a driving force in the narrative is now suddenly no longer present. Just like in reality, death should be final, the end of one person's story and the continuation of the rest, in spite of their loss. I can't say exactly when, but at some point death in fiction stopped meaning something. The impact of death stops having an influence on the audience when at any moment the character who has died can be returned to the story by fictional means of revival, resurrection, or by faking their own death. This is a disappointing development in fiction as a whole, but there might be hope yet. Does Akame Ga Kill bring the meaning of death back into the forefront of fiction, or does it just come off as edgy and trying? The enthusiastic country bumpkin Tatsumi and his friends arrive in the imperial capital in hopes of making a fortune to send to their impoverished village. However, Tatsumi's idealistic vision of the capital is destroyed when his eyes are opened to the corruption festering within the grand city. In a chance encounter with the notorious assassin squad Night Raid, he is left with no choice but to join the rebellion, learning the killing trade in order to someday cut the rotten core out of the capital and free the Empire's citizens from their oppression. But Tatsumi will have to come to terms with the fact that no matter how kind all of his new friends are to him, at the end of the day they are all unrepentant, ruthless killers, and at any moment any of them could be forced to pay for their unforgivable crimes. The story centres around Night Raid and their exploits as they take the steps needed, big or small, to prepare for a revolution big enough to topple the Empire and rescue the nation from the evil minister's rule. As a premise, it's a relatively basic one, but here it is presented and executed with total mastery. We are given a full picture of the rotten natures of the capital's privileged, as well as a horrific glimpse into the daily terror the not so fortunate live in. The people of the capital are subjugated and subjected to torture, slavery, prostitution, and other unimaginably horrific acts. But at the same time, we enjoy the buddy-buddy mood of Night Raid, the way they enjoy each other's company and savour every moment together, because any moment could be their last. It achieves a delicate balance between depicting the desperate, nihilistic misery of the people and the determined optimism of their prospective saviours. Sometimes this despair ends with no catharsis, which can easily be considered a problem, but I'm all too sure that when the time for revolution comes, we'll get all the catharsis we want. Too much suffering and it would come off as edgy, but Akame Ga Kill manages to perfectly dictate the overall mood. It is in no way a carefree manga, but it doesn't steep you in depression either. Death is a matter of fact in the world of Akame Ga Kill, and the people who live in this world have to accept that, until Night Raid achieve their grand objective, that is. Speaking of which, the greatest thing about Akame Ga Kill is the presence of death that casts its grim, lengthy shadow over the story. The members of Night Raid are no better than their targets, ruthless killers who have murdered countless people for the sake of the rebellion. At any moment, any of them could be made to pay for the blood that they've spilled with their own life. This is a fact that is stated out right from the very start, and I'm glad to say that Akame Ga Kill really sets out to deliver on that promise. Although you naturally wouldn't take the warning seriously, it doesn't take long for the series to prove to you that death has an influence in its world. People die when they are killed, and in Akame Ga Kill, this is brutally true. When two Tegu wielders meet on the field of battle, death is an unavoidable reality, and when a person dies, there's no way of bringing them back to life. Like I said before, death is supposed to represent the final point of a character's existence. Their influence on the world wanes to nothing, and the other character will never be able to see them again. Although that much should be obvious to you, when was the last time you really felt like you would never see a character again when they died? Even when a series does respect the border between life and death nowadays, usually it makes every attempt to cheat some kind of meaning or catharsis out of it, to set the audience at ease. In Akame Ga Kill, when a character dies it leaves a genuine impact on you, and the series doesn't skimp on deaths. Anyone could die at any time, and this makes it very easy to get invested whenever someone's life is endangered. You really never know which fight is going to be a character's last, and if knowing that wasn't enough, then feeling it really brings tension to every confrontation. With plenty of near fatal moments to keep you on your toes, you can never confidently predict who's going to die either. Each character grows continuously, never ceasing to develop until they meet their end, where it fittingly and abruptly stops. As a result of this continuous brand of character development, you find yourself constantly on the edge of your seat because absolutely anyone really could just die. It is a remarkable accomplishment of Akame Ga Kill that death, for once in a very long while, is meaningful and lurks around every corner, leaving an impression wherever it treads. I mentioned Tegus before, the imperial weapons scattered throughout the world that each member of Night Raid possesses. Jojo's bizarre adventure and its stand powers had a massive impact on the manga industry and the way it portrayed fantasy weapons and superpowers in general. So much so that it created a pitfall for creators upon whom it left an impression. It's very easy now for a superpower manga to accidentally accidentally rip off a stand from Jojo, or at least to remind the reader of too much of one. This is something that Akame Ga Kill clearly takes into account, as the Tegus all feel somewhat unique, and although a few of the simplest ones are inevitably similar to the simplest of stands, the focus of the action is on the individuals fighting, and not the tools they use. This shifts your attention away from the Tegu itself, and distinguishes it from the very psychological focus of Jojo's action sequences. Tegus are very simple armaments, and thanks to this, they differ tremendously from their supernatural forefathers. Getting away from Jojo now, the Tegus really help to characterize their users too. Every Tegu is deadly, but in their own ways, and none of them feel like copies or rehashes of other Tegus. They are the unique tools of assassination, espionage, and destruction wielded by Imperial hit squads and rebellious organizations like Night Raid alike, doing well to spice up each battle with a less psychological approach that sets it apart from its predecessors. Tatsumi is the protagonist, and a pretty bland one at that. If there's a single weak element in the whole cast, then it's him. It helps the flow of a story that we see things from the perspective of someone who is eventually enlightened and must come to terms with the horrific things that are allowed to transpire in the capital. We aren't just told about these atrocious deeds. Along with Tatsumi, we experience the dishonesty, corruption, and misery of the capital firsthand. Unfortunately, his youth begins to wane as the suffering of the people becomes old news. Without a Tegu of his own, he has no place in the story, and when he eventually gets one, he's only elevated to being just another member of Night Raid. We could see the story from the perspective of Akame as the titular character, or even the comic relief Lubik, and there wouldn't be much of a change. I suppose it's Tatsumi who allows other characters to shine as he interacts with them, but we've yet to see our protagonist truly shine. There are many members of Night Raid, none of them standing out too much, but neither of them feeling insignificant either. There's the titular Akame, a ruthless swordswoman with a penchant for sweets and a big heart hidden behind a cold demeanour. Even though she's the titular character, she doesn't hold more importance to the plot than any of the other members of Night Raid, although her relationship with Kurame could make her a much more prevalent character in the future. Until then, she is a perfectly enjoyable character, if a little underplayed. She's a cool, level-headed fighter, and with Tatsumi, she makes liberal use of tough love, wishing only the best for her new teammate. Leone is the older sister character who loves teasing Tatsumi and enjoys bringing vengeance down upon her targets. She's an uplifting character who knows how to make light of a tough situation. This is very important in establishing a certain balance between presenting dark subject matter and getting over it, so to speak. Her influence on the overall tone of the series makes for a very welcome character. Shell is a ditzy young woman who dotes on Tatsumi, offering him a shoulder to cry on when he needs it. Her supportive role is a good method of alleviating some emotional tension, effectively giving the reader closure of their own. Mine is a bratty girl with a fiery outgoing personality and a strong will to boot. What she lacks in abstract use, she makes up for in her long-range combat capability, widening the variety of the fights she participates in. Hopefully she'll have more development somewhere down the line. Lubik is a pervy young man who acts as Night Raid's comic relief. Although he is forgettable for the most part, when he plays off of other characters between fights, he gets a chance to shine. Comic relief is important to balance out the tension and offer tonal variety, and it's Lubik's prime purpose. Bulat is the beefcake big bro character who is a source of encouragement for Tatsumi. He helps our protagonist better himself and become stronger, while dipping his toe in comic relief and lightening the mood all the while. I can appreciate his input in making sure Tatsumi is able to keep up on a battlefield of Tegu wielders until he gets his own. Chelsea is a late inclusion to the ranks of Night Raid who specialises in infiltration and espionage. Instead of embracing the friendly nature of the group, she sees it as a weakness and challenges the notion of friendship among assassins with gratifying results. Her Tegu also significantly shakes up the nature of battles from this point onward, able to slip behind enemy lines undetected. As a character who brings something new to every facet of Night Raid, from the interpersonal to the strategical, she is a wonderful addition to the cast. Finally, Nagenda is the leader of Night Raid who is put to use drawing up plans and providing missions for the group, giving the plot a push forward when the outcome of a successful mission leaves a lull in its place. Most of the members of Night Raid bring something of their own to the table, whether it's comic relief, a tone setter, or a useful narrative tool. We become invested in every single one of these characters, and, as I've mentioned before, any number of them could have died at any point in the series. These deaths make us cherish what we have left of the cast, each death leaving more impact on the reader than the last one. Death is our first major villain, a terrifyingly powerful general of the Imperial Army who comes back to the capital after casually subjugating a neighbouring tribe. She is one of the best characters thus far, a strong, confident woman who now, at a comfortable stage in her life, feels compelled to seek out a lover who can stand face to face with her on equal ground. It's the human element that makes Death an amazingly entertaining character. While she does torture and oppress the enemies of the Empire, she takes pride in her own skill and follows her own survival of the fittest morality in everything that she she does. As a general, she shows compassion for her allies in much the same way the members of Night Raid are compassionate towards each other. Despite being an inherently evil person, we still sympathise with Hez death because she doesn't try to justify her actions and instead stands proud in her beliefs. While she possesses many heinous traits, it's her admirable ones that tend to shine the brightest, without necessarily outshining her villainous side. Her quest for romance serves to humanise her further, bringing a facet to her character that anyone can understand and get behind. As a character, she is a joy to see in action, and as a villain, she represents a firm, seemingly immovable obstacle in the hero's path whose Tegu we expect to eclipse any of Night Raid's. Kurume is our second major villain, a biologically and mentally disturbed young girl who works under the Empire alongside Esdeath, and possesses one of the strongest Tegus thus far. She shares a dark history with Akame, and as her long-term target, Kurume succeeds in bringing Akame to the forefront of the manga's focus. Instead of being thrust upon us from the very start, it seems like the titular character is going to gradually become more and more relevant as the series progresses, which only makes me more excited to continue reading. The other great thing about Kurume is that while Esdeath brings an endearing shade of humanity to the Empire, she does the complete opposite. Her mysterious, tormented past appear to have left her a husk, finding immense joy in the slaughter of the innocents and remaining completely ignorant of human decency. Everything about her, from her mental state to the workings of her body itself, remind us that every last vestige of humanity was torn from her long ago, save for the occasional habit that insinuates her personally devastating past. This and the horrifying nature of her Tegu make her yet another amazing villain, one that is sure to haunt Night Raid for a long time to come. The vast majority of the supporting cast is comprised of short-time villains and victims with a clock practically hanging over their head until they are put out of their misery. Each of the temporary villains is sufficiently menacing and provides fresh glimpses into the kinds of corruption and suffering that goes on in the capital. From human trafficking to crazed imperial soldiers and more, none of them are copy-pastes of each other, and eventually the small villains are phased out in favour of longer-lasting, better established ones. This is where the Jaeger unit comes in, Esdeath's security squad created to hunt down and destroy Night Raid. There's Wave, a character played as a second protagonist which helps to humanise the enemy and give us a more intimate look at Esdeath and Kurume, a fellow Jaeger. Seryu is an emotionally unstable girl who is obsessed with delivering her own brand of justice, whose earlier role in the story cements the Jaegers as a villain team. Bowles is a masked arsonist whose personable demeanour and display of housekeeping skills make him one of the most endearing of the Jaegers, actively humanising the enemy to a greater degree. Rune acts as Esdeath's supervisor, feeding intel to the group but not doing much else besides. He's one of the most forgettable characters in the series so far. Dr. Stylish is the weapons master of the Jaegers and leaves a mixed impression, ultimately not falling into the categories of likeable or dislikable, which is disappointing. Sometimes Akame Ga Kill doesn't seem to know what to do with the Jaegers, establish them as the definitive villain team to pose against Night Raid or use them to humanise the Empire. One chapter will spend all our time warming up to the Jaegers and the next seeing Night Raid pitted directly against them. But overall, I like the Jaegers, because as an endearing subcast of characters placed in opposition against the protagonist's team, we feel some sort of loss regardless of who wins. The artwork in Akame Ga Kill is less than impressive for an action series. In static scenes, the art is perfectly clear and expressive, but when it tries to depict motion, the panels just become confusing to decipher. Panels of combat are supposed to be fast paced, but when you have to sit there staring hard at each panel because you don't know what's going on in them, then there's a problem. Simple sword swings are easy enough to understand, but it's when the artwork attempts complex, full body movements that it gets really difficult to follow. Nothing ever really stands out among the other elements in a panel either, meaning that your eyes never automatically focus on the right object. It isn't impossible to understand the action going on, but it's a very prevalent fault. In terms of detail, the series improves steadily. It starts out in a tolerable place and subtly grows in detail until the characters become very expressive and the extent of the gore becomes much less vague. You could easily call the art style choppy, and it certainly is lacking in soft shades and round shapes, though this helps to give the few intimate moments the artwork has that much more impact. The jagged simplicity of the art makes it capable of moving fluidly between tones, from comedic to melancholy, without coming off as jarring in the attempt. Additionally, the designs for both the characters and the Tegus are extremely distinctive, ensuring that even in the midst of a confusing action scene, we still at least know who is who and which Tegu is which. The artwork has plenty of flaws but narrowly avoids becoming unbearable, and instead improves over time. It starts out as merely tolerable and transforms gradually into a more detailed art style, suited to a number of uses but unfortunately never picking itself up enough to be considered particularly good. I love Akame Ga Kill. There's a point in any series where you stop instinctively thinking about what's good and what's bad about it, and embrace both out of love for the material. I can tolerate the frequently jarring action scenes, the amateur artwork, and the lack of catharsis in general, because the story and characters are a modern masterwork in the series' depiction of death. It truly captures what makes fictitious death compelling and puts it to good use in creating a story of rebellion and espionage rife with tension and intrigue. As the reader, I hold each character dearly regardless of the full knowledge that any of them could be struck down in their prime at any moment. Although Akame Ga Kill isn't complete yet, I relish every minute I get with this lively world and bold characters in the build up to what is looking to be one of the most epic climactic showdowns of the decade. I urge anyone within the sound of my voice to give it your best try, because what we have here is something phenomenal, truly a benchmark for the genre. The first 7 volumes of Akame Ga Kill and its companion series Akame Ga Kill 0 are available in English from Yen Press, with more on the way. It's also available digitally via Amazon's Kindle app. If you like a violent, abusive type of horror, then I'd recommend Tokyo Ghoul. It treats its characters as harshly as its world would have you think, and while it isn't as toothy as Akame Ga Kill, the amount of suffering on display more than makes up for that. Or if you found yourself particularly interested in the unique Tegus and want more in the vein of individualistic superpowers, then read Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. From part 3 onwards it features stands, supernatural manifestations that work similarly to Tegus with a more psychological approach to the combat. It's also a manga classic that should be on anyone's list regardless. Hopefully one of these will be to your liking. I'll be turning off comments on this video just because this is such a spoiler sensitive subject, so until next time, cheerio.